are back with the Witch of Portobello. As you can tell, I'm getting into character now. I'm obsessed with this book. Taking a 2-day break from it, I'm like, what's gonna happen next? I have to socialize with people and work, but I got to know what's happening next. Alright, so let's get to it. Alright. Andrea McCain, actress. Of course I'm to blame. If it hadn't been for me, Athena would never have come to the theater that morning, gathered us all together, asked us to lie down on a stage and begin a relaxation exercise involving breathing and bringing our awareness to each part of our body. Relax your thighs. We all obeyed as if we were before a goddess, someone who knew more than all of us, even though we'd done this kind of exercise hundreds of times before. We were all curious to know what would come after. Now relax your face and breathe deeply. Did she really think she was teaching us anything new? We were expecting a lecture, a talk, but I must control myself. Let's get back to what happened then. We relaxed, and then came a silence that left us completely disoriented. When I discussed it with my colleagues afterwards, we all agreed that we felt the exercise was over, that it was time to sit up and look around, except no one did. We remained lying down in a kind of enforced meditation for 15 interminable minutes. Then she spoke again. You've had plenty of time to doubt me now. One or two of you looked impatient, but now I'm going to ask you just one thing. When I count to 3, be different. I don't mean be another person, an animal, or a house. Try to forget everything you've learned in drama courses. I'm not asking you to be actors and to demonstrate your abilities. I'm asking you to seize being human and to transform yourselves into something you don't know. We were all lying still on the floor with our eyes closed, and so we couldn't see how anyone else was reacting. Athena was playing on that uncertainty. I'm going to say a few words, and you'll immediately associate certain images with those words. Remember that you're all full of the poison of preconceived ideas, and that if I were to say fate, you would probably start imagining your lives in the future. And if I were to say red, you would probably make some psychoanalytic interpretation. That isn't what I want. As I said, I want you to be different. She couldn't explain what she really wanted when no one complained. I felt sure that they were simply being polite, but that when the lecture was over, they would never invite Athena back. They would even tell me that I'd been naive to have sought her out in the first place. The first word is sacred. So as not to die of boredom, I decided to join in the game. I imagined my mother, my boyfriend, my future children, a brilliant career. Make a gesture that means sacred. I folded my arms over my chest as if I were embracing my loved ones. I found out later that most people opened their arms to form a cross, and that one woman opened her legs as if she were making love. Relax again and again. Forget about everything and keep your eyes closed. I'm not criticizing, but from what I saw, you seem to be giving form to what you consider to be sacred. That isn't what I want. When I give you the next word, don't try to define it as it manifests itself in the world. Open all the channels and allow the poison of reality to drain away. Be abstract, and then you will enter the world I'm guiding you toward. That last phrase had real authority, and I felt the energy in the theater change. Now the voice knew where it wanted to take us. She was a teacher now, not a lecturer. Earth, she said. Suddenly I understood what she meant. It was no longer my imagination that mattered, but my body in contact with the soil. I was the earth. Make a gesture that represents the earth. I didn't move. I was the soil of that stage. Perfect. None of you moved. For the first time, you all experienced the same feeling. Instead of describing something, you transformed yourself into an idea. She fell silent again, for what I imagined were 5 long minutes. The silence made us feel lost, unable to tell whether she simply had no idea how to continue, or if she was merely unfamiliar with our usual intense rhythm of working. I'm going to say a third word. She paused. Center. I felt, and this was entirely unconscious, that all my vital energy went to my navel, where it glowed yellow. This frightened me. If someone touched it, I could die. Make a gesture for center. Her words sounded like a command, and I immediately placed my hands on my belly to protect myself. Perfect, said Athena. You can sit up now. I opened my eyes and I saw the extinguished stage lights up above me, distant and dull. I rubbed my face and I got to my feet, and I noticed that my colleagues looked surprised. Was that the lecture? Asked the director. You can call it a lecture if you like. Well, thank you for coming. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have to start rehearsals for the next play. I haven't finished yet. Perhaps another time. Everyone seemed confused by the director's reaction. After some initial doubts, I think we were enjoying the session. It was different. No pretending to be things or people, no visualizing apples or candles, no sitting in a circle holding hands as if we were practicing some sacred ritual. It was simply something slightly absurd, and we wanted to know where it would take us. Without a flicker of emotion, Athena bent down to pick up her bag. At that moment, we heard a voice from the stalls. Marvelous! Heron had come to join her. Sorry, there was a hair in my face and it's tickling me. Heron had come to join her. The director was afraid of him because Heron knew the theater critics on his newspaper and had close ties with the media generally. You stopped being individuals and turned into ideas. What a shame you're so busy. But don't worry, Athena. We'll find another group to work with, and then I can see how your lecture ends. I have contacts. I was still thinking about the light traveling through my whole body to my navel. Who was that woman? Had my colleagues experienced the same thing? Just a moment, said the director, aware of the look of surprise on everyone's face. I suppose we could postpone rehearsals today. No, you mustn't do that. Besides, I have to get back to the newspaper to write something about this woman. You carry on doing what you always do. I've just found an excellent story. If Athena felt lost in that debate between the two men, she didn't show it. She climbed down from the stage and went off with Heron. We turned to the director and asked him why he'd reacted like that. With all due respect, Andrea, I thought the conversation in the bar about sex was far more interesting than the nonsense we've just been engaging in. Did you notice how she kept falling silent? She didn't know what to do next. But I felt something strange, said one of the older actors. When she said center, it was as if all my vital energy were suddenly focused on my navel, and I've never experienced that before. Did you? Are you sure? Asked an actress. And judging by her words, she'd experienced the same thing. She's a bit of a witch, that woman, said the director, interrupting the conversation. Let's get back to work. We started doing our usual stretching exercises, warm-ups, and meditation, all strictly by the book. Then after a few improvisations, we went straight into a read-through of the new script. Gradually, Athena's presence seemed to be dissolving, and everything was returning to what it was. A theater, a ritual created by the Greeks thousands of years ago, where we were used to pretending to be different people, but that was pure play acting. Athena wasn't like that, and I was determined to see her again, especially after what the director had said about her. Heron Ryan, journalist. Unbeknownst to Athena, I'd followed exactly the same steps as the actors, obeying everything that she told us to do, except that I kept my eyes open so that I could follow what was happening on stage. The moment she said, "Make a gesture for center," I'd placed my hand on my navel, and to my surprise I saw that everyone, including the director, had done the same thing. What was going on? That afternoon, I had to write a dreary article about a visiting head of state, a real drag. In order to amuse myself between phone calls, I decided to ask colleagues in the office what gesture they would make for the word center. Most of them made jokey comments about political parties. One pointed to the center of the earth, another put his hand on his heart, but no one, absolutely no one, thought of their navel as the center of anything. In the end, though, I managed to speak to someone who had interesting information on the subject. When I got home, Andrea had had a bath, laid the table, and was waiting for me to start supper. She opened a bottle of very expensive wine, filled 2 glasses, and offered me one. "So how was supper last night?" How long can a man live with a lie? I didn't want to lose the woman standing there before me who had stuck with me through thick and thin, who was always by my side when I felt my life had lost meaning and direction. I loved her. But in that crazy world into which I was blindly plunging, my heart was far away, trying to adapt to something I possibly knew but couldn't accept being large enough for 2 people. Since I would never risk letting go of a certainty in favor of a mere possibility, I tried to minimize the significance of what had happened at that restaurant, mainly because nothing had happened, apart from an exchange of lines by a poet who had suffered greatly for love. Athena's a difficult person to get to know. Andrea laughed. That's precisely why men must find her so fascinating. She awakens that rapidly disappearing protective instinct of yours. Best to change the subject. I've always been convinced that women have a supernatural ability to know what's going on in a man's soul. They're all witches. I've been looking into what happened at the theater today. You don't know this, but I had my eyes open throughout the exercises. You've always got your eyes open. I assume it's part of being a journalist. Then you're going to talk about the moment when we all did exactly the same thing. We talked a lot about that. In the bar after rehearsals, a historian told me about a Greek temple where they used to predict the future. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi, and which housed a marble stone called the navel. Stories from the time described Delphi as the center of the planet, and I went to the newspaper archives to make a few inquiries. In Petra and Jordan, there's another iconic novel. I love the Oracle of Delphi. If you guys have any knowledge, or don't have any knowledge about her, you should look her up, or just look her up for fun if you do. I love the Oracle of Delphi. And I love that there's a correlation here. Both navels try to show the axis through which the energy of the world travels, marking in an invisible way, or in a visible way, something that is only there on the invisible map. Jerusalem is also called the navel of the world, as is an island in the Pacific Ocean, another place I've forgotten now, because I had never associated the two things, like dance. What? Nothing. No, I know what you mean. Belly dancing, the oldest form of dance, recorded in which everything revolves about the belly. I was trying to avoid the subject because I told you that in Transylvania I saw Athena dance, and she was dressed, of course, but all of the movement began with her navel and gradually spread to the rest of her body. She was right. Best to change the subject again and talk about the theater, about boring journalistic stuff, and then drink a little wine and end up in bed making love while outside the rain was starting to fall. I noticed that at the moment of orgasm, Andrea's body was all focused on her belly, and I'd seen this many times before. I had never thought anything of it. Antoine Lucador, historian. Heron started spending a fortune on phone calls to France, asking me to get all the information I could by the weekend. And he kept going on about the navel, which seemed to me the least interesting and the least romantic thing in the world. But then the English don't see things in the same way as the French, and so instead of asking questions, I tried to find out what science had to say on the subject. I soon realized that historical knowledge wasn't enough. I could locate a monument here, a dolmen there, but the odd thing was that the ancient cultures all seemed to agree on the subject and even use the same word to define the place they considered sacred. I'd never noticed this before, and I started to get interested when I saw the number of coincidences. I went in search of something that would complement them: human behavior and beliefs. I immediately had to reject the first and most logical explanation that were nourished through the umbilical cord, which is why the navel is for us the center of life. A psychologist immediately pointed out that the theory made no sense at all. Man's general idea was always to cut the umbilical cord, and from then on, the brain or the heart become the more important symbols. When we are interested in something, everything around us appears to refer to it. The mystics all call these phenomena signs, and the skeptics call it coincidence, and the psychologists concentrated focus, although I've yet to find out what the terms historians use. One night, my adolescent daughter came home with a navel piercing. "Why did you do that?" "Because I felt like it." A perfectly natural and honest explanation, even for a historian who needs to find reason for everything. When I went to her room, I saw a poster of her favorite female pop star. She had a bare midriff, and in that photo on the wall, her navel did look like the center of the world. I phoned Heron and asked why he was so interested. For the first time, he told me about what had happened at the theater, and how the people there had all responded to a command in the same spontaneous, unexpected manner. It was impossible to get any more information out of my daughter, so I decided to consult some specialists. No one seemed very interested until I found Francois Shepka, an Indian psychologist. Editor's note: the scientist requested that his name and nationality be changed. Hence the French name for an Indian man. Okay, that makes sense. I was like, that doesn't make sense, but no, I get it. He was starting to revolutionize the therapies currently in use. According to him, the idea that traumas could be resolved by a return to childhood had never got anyone anywhere. Many problems that had been overcome in adult life resurfaced, and grown-ups started blaming their parents for failures and defeats. Shepka was at war with the various French psychoanalytic associations, and a conversation about absurd objects like the navel seemed to relax him. He warmed to the theme, but didn't at first tackle it directly. He said that, according to one of the most respected psychoanalysts in history, the Swiss analyst Carl Gustav Jung, we all drank from the same spring, and it's called the soul of the world, the collective unconscious. Y'all should read some Carl Jung, just saying. However much we try to be independent individuals, a part of our memory is the same, and we all seek the ideal of beauty, dance, divinity, and music. Society, meanwhile, tries to define how these ideals should be manifested in reality. Currently, for example, the ideal of beauty is to be thin, and yet thousands of years ago, all the images of goddesses were fat. And it's the same with happiness. There are a series of rules, and if you fail to follow them, your conscious mind will refuse to accept the idea that you're happy. Jung used to divide individual progress into 4 stages. The first was a persona, the mask we use every day, pretending to be who we are. We believe that the world depends on us, and that we're wonderful parents, and that our children don't understand us, and that our bosses are unfair, and that The dream of every human being is to never work and to travel constantly, and many people realize that there's something wrong with this story, but because they don't want to change anything, they quickly drive the thought from their head. A few do try to understand what's wrong and end up finding the shadow. The shadow is our dark side, which dictates how we should act and behave. And when we try to free ourselves from the persona, we all turn on a light inside us, and we see the cobwebs and the cowardice, the meanness. The shadow is there to stop our progress, and it usually succeeds, and we run back to what we were before we doubted. However, some do survive this encounter with their own cobweb, saying, "Yes, I have a few faults, but I'm good enough, and I want to go forward." At this moment, the shadow disappears, and we come into contact with the soul. By soul, Carl Jung didn't mean soul in the religious sense. He speaks of a return to the soul of the world, the source of all knowledge. Instincts become sharper, emotions more radical, and interpretation of signs become more important than logic. Perceptions of reality grow less rigid, and we start to struggle with things to which we are unaccustomed, and we start to react in ways that we ourselves find unexpected. And we discover that if we can channel that continuous flow of energy, and we can organize it around a very solid center, what Jung calls the wise old man for men, the great mother for women, allowing this to manifest itself is dangerous. Generally speaking, anyone who reaches this stage has a tendency to consider themselves a saint, a tamer of spirit, a prophet. A great deal of maturity is required if someone is to come into contact with the energy of the wise old man or the great mother. Jung went mad, said my friend. And when he had explained the 4 stages described by the Swiss psychoanalyst, when he got in touch with his wise old man, he started saying that he was guided by a spirit called Philemon. And finally, we come to the symbol of the navel. Not only people, but societies fit into these 4 stages. Western civilization has a persona, the ideas that guide us in its attempt to adapt. I wish we would talk about the anima and the animus. I feel like that was an important thing, but whatever. We'll read Carl Jung later, okay? I'll show you all about it. In its attempt to adapt to changes, it comes into contact with the shadow, and we see mass demonstrations in which the collective energy can be manipulated both for good and ill. Suddenly, for some reason, the persona or the shadow are no longer enough for human beings. And then comes the moment to make the leap, the unconscious connection with the soul. New values begin to emerge. I've noticed a resurgence in the cult of the female face of God. An excellent example, and at the end of this process, if those new values are to become established, the entire race comes into contact with the symbols, the coded language by which the present-day generations communicate with their ancestral knowledge. One of those symbols of rebirth is the navel. And in the navel of Vishnu, the Indian divinity responsible for creation and destruction, sits the god who will rule each cycle. Yogis consider the navel one of the chakras, one of the sacred points on the human body. Primitive tribes often used to build monuments in the place that they believed to be the navel in the world. In South America, people who go into trances say that the true form of the human being is a luminous egg that connects with other people through filaments that emerge from the navel. The mandala, a design said to stimulate meditation, is a symbolic representation of this. I passed all this information on to Heron in England before the agreed date. I told him that the woman who had succeeded in provoking the same absurd reaction in a group of people must have enormous power, and that I wouldn't be surprised if she wasn't some kind of paranormal. I suggested that he study her more closely. I had never thought about the subject before, and I tried to forget it at once. However, my daughter said that I was behaving oddly and thinking only of myself, that I was, in short, navel gazing. Um, Deidre O'Neill, known as Etta. It was a complete disaster. How could you put the idea in my head that I could teach? Why humiliate me in front of other people? I should just forget you even exist. When I was taught to dance, I danced, and when I was taught calligraphy, I practiced calligraphy. But demanding that I go so far beyond my limits was pure wickedness, and that's why I caught the train up to Scotland. That's why I came here, so that you could see how much I hate you. Hate is very close to love. She couldn't stop crying. Fortunately, she'd left the child with her parents because she was talking rather too loudly, and there was a faint whiff of wine on her breath, and I asked her to come in. Making all that noise at my door would do nothing to help my already somewhat tarnished reputation with people putting it around that I received visits from both men and women and organized sex orgies in the name of Satan. But she still stood there shouting, "It's all your fault, you humiliated me." One window opened and then another. Well, anyone working to change the actions of the world must be prepared for the fact that her neighbors won't always be happy. I went over to Athena and did exactly what she wanted me to do. I put my arms around her and she continued weeping, her head resting on my shoulder. Very gently, I helped her up the steps into the house. I made some tea, the recipe for which I share with no one because it was taught to me by my protector. I placed it in front of her and she drank it down in one gulp. By doing so, she demonstrated that her trust in me was still intact. "Why am I like this?" she asked. I knew then that the efforts of the alcohol had been neutralized. There are men who love me. I have a son who adores me and sees me as his model in life. I have adopted parents whom I consider to be my real family and who would lay down their lives for me. I filled in all the blank spaces in my past. And when I went in search of my birth mother, I have enough money to spend the next 3 years doing nothing but enjoying life, and still I'm not content. I feel miserable and guilty because God blessed me with tragedies that I've managed to overcome and with miracles to which I've done credit, but I'm never content. I always want more. The last thing I needed was to go to that theater and add a failure to my list of victories. "Do you think you did the wrong thing?" She looked at me in surprise. "Why do you ask that?" I said nothing, but waited her to answer. "No, but I did the right thing. I went there with a journalist friend. I didn't have a clue what I was going to do, but suddenly things started to emerge as if out of the void, and I felt the presence of the Great Mother by my side, guiding me, instructing me, and filling my voice with a confidence I didn't really feel. So why are you complaining? Because no one understood. Is that important? Important enough to make you travel up to Scotland and insult me in front of everyone? Of course it's important. If I can do absolutely anything and know I'm doing the right thing, how come I'm not at least loved and admired?" So that was a problem. I took her hand and led her into the same room where, weeks before, she had sat contemplating a candle. I asked her to sit down and try to calm herself a little. Although I was sure the tea was already taking effect, I went to my room, picked up a round mirror, and placed it before her. "You have everything, and you fought for every inch of your territory. Now look at your tears. Look at your face and the bitterness etched on it. Look at the woman in the mirror, but don't laugh this time. Try to understand her." I allowed her time to follow my instructions. When I saw that she was, as I intended, going into a trance, I went on. What is the secret of life? We call it grace or blessing. Everyone struggles to be satisfied with what they have. Apart from me, apart from you, apart from a few people who will, alas, have to make a small sacrifice in the name of something greater. Our imagination is larger than the world around us. We go beyond our limits. This used to be called witchcraft, but fortunately things have changed. Otherwise we would both already have been burned at the stake. When they stopped burning women, science found an explanation for our behavior, normally referring to as female hysteria. We don't get burned anymore, but it does cause problems, especially in the workplace. But don't worry, eventually they'll call it wisdom. And keep looking in the mirror. Who can you see? A woman. And what is there beyond that woman? She hesitated. I asked again. She said, another woman, more authentic and more intelligent than me. It's as if she were a soul that didn't belong to me, but which is nonetheless part of me. Exactly. Now I'm going to ask you to imagine one of the most important symbols in alchemy. A snake forming a circle and swallowing its own tail. Can you imagine that? She nodded. Ouroboros. That's what it's called. The snake that eats its own tail. That's what life is like for people like you and me. Constantly destroying and rebuilding ourselves. Everything in your life has followed the same pattern, from lost to found, from divorce to new love, from working at a bank to selling real estate in the desert. Only one thing remains intact, your son. He is the connecting thread, and you must respect that. She started to cry again, but her tears were different this time. You came here because you saw a female face in the flames. That face is a face that you can see now in the mirror, so try to honor it. Don't let yourself be weighed down by what other people think, because in a few years, in a few decades, or in a few centuries, that way of thinking will have changed. Live now what others will only live in the future. What do you want? You can't want to be happy because that's too easy and too boring. You can't want only to love because that's impossible. What do you want? You want to justify your life, to live it as intensely as possible. That is at once a trap and a source of ecstasy. Try to be alert to that danger and experience the joy, the adventure of being that woman who is beyond the image reflected in the mirror. Her eyes closed, but I knew that my words had penetrated her soul and would stay there. If you want to take a risk and continue teaching, do so. If you don't want to, know that you've already gone further than most other people. Her body began to relax. I held her in my arms until she fell asleep, her head on my breast. I tried to whisper a few more things to her because I'd been through the same stages and I knew how difficult it was, just as my protector had told me it would be. As I myself had found out through painful experience. However, the fact that it was difficult didn't make the experience any less interesting. What experience? Living as a human being and as a divinity, moving from tension into relaxation, from relaxation into trance, from trance into a more intense contact with other people, from that contact back into tension, and so on, like the serpent swallowing its own tail. It was no easy matter, mainly because it requires unconditional love, which does not fear suffering, rejection, or loss. Whoever drinks this water once can never quench her thirst at other springs. Andrea McCain, actress. The other day you mentioned Gaia, who created herself and had a child without the help of a man. You said quite rightly that the Great Mother was eventually superseded by the male gods. But you forgot about Hera, a descendant of your favorite goddess. Hera is more important because she's more practical. She rules the skies and the earth, the seasons of the year and the storms. According to the same Greeks you cited, the Milky Way that we see in the sky was created out of the milk that spurted forth from her breast. A beautiful breast, it must be said, because all-powerful Zeus changed himself into a bird purely in order to be able to have his way with her without being rejected. We were walking through a large department store in Knightsbridge. I'd phoned her saying that I'd like to talk, and she'd invited me to the winter sales. It would have been far more pleasant to have a cup of tea together or lunch in some quiet restaurant. Your son could get lost in this crowd. Don't worry about him. Go on with what you were telling me. Hera discovered the trick and forced Zeus to marry her. Immediately after the ceremony, however, the great king of Olympus returned to his playboy lifestyle, seducing any woman, mortal or immortal, who happened to be by. Hera, remained faithful. Rather than blame her husband, she blamed the women for their loose behavior. Isn't that what we all do? I didn't know what she meant, and so I carried on, talking as if I hadn't heard what she said. Then she decided to give him a taste of his own medicine, and find a god or a man to take her to bed. Look, couldn't we stop for a while and have a coffee? But Athena had just gone into a lingerie shop. Do you think this is pretty? She asked, holding up provocative flesh-colored bra and panty set. Oh yes, very. Will anyone see it if you wear it? Of course. Do you think I'm a saint? I said, oh, of course. Or do you think I'm a saint? But go on with what you were saying about Hera. Zeus was horrified by her behavior. Hera was leading an independent life and didn't give two hoots about her marriage. Have you really got a boyfriend? Yes. I've never seen him. She went over to the checkout, paid for the lingerie, and put it in her bag. Bureau's hungry, and I'm sure he's not the slightest bit interested in Greek myths, so hurry up and finish Hera's story. It has a rather silly ending. Zeus, afraid of losing his beloved, pretended that he was getting married again. When Hera found out, she saw that things had gone too far. Lovers were one thing, but divorce was unthinkable. And nothing new there then. She decided to go to the ceremony and kick up a fuss, and it was only then that she realized that Zeus was marrying a statue. What did Hera do? She roared with laughter that broke the ice between them, and she became once more the queen of the skies. Great. So if that ever happens to you, what? If your man gets himself another woman, don't forget to laugh. I'm not a goddess, and I'd be much more vengeful. Anyway, why is it I've never seen your boyfriend? Because he's always busy. Where did you meet him? At the bank where I used to work. He had an account there. And now, if you don't mind, my son's waiting for me. You're right. If I don't keep my eye on him, he could get lost among all these people. By the way, we're having a meeting at my place next week. You're invited, of course. Yes, I know. Yes, and I know who organized it. Athena kissed me lightly on both cheeks and left. At least she'd got the message. That afternoon at the theater, the director made a point of telling me that he was annoyed because he said I'd arranged for a group of actors to go and visit that woman. I explained that it hadn't been my idea. Heron had become obsessed with the subject of navels and had asked me if some other actors would be prepared to continue the interrupted lecture. That said, I added, it was my choice to ask them. Of course it was, but the last thing I wanted was for him to go to Athena's house alone. The actors had all arrived, but instead of another read-through of the new play, the director decided to change the program. Today we'll do another exercise in psychodrama. Editor's note, therapeutic technique that involves people acting out their personal experiences. There was no need. We all knew how the characters would behave in the situations described by the playwright. Can I suggest a subject? Everyone turned to look at me. The director seemed surprised. What's this, a revolt? No, listen, we create a situation where a man, after great difficulty, manages to get a group of people together to celebrate an important ritual in the community, something, let's say, like the autumn harvest. Meanwhile, a strange woman arrives, and because of her beauty and the various rumors circulating about her being a goddess in disguise. For example, the group of the men. Sorry, I'm a bit uncomfortable in this chair. Where was I? The group the men had formed in order to keep alive the traditions in his village breaks up, and its members all go off to see the woman instead. But that's got nothing to do with the play we're rehearsing, said one of the actresses. The director, however, had understood what I was driving at. That's an excellent idea. Let's begin. And turning to me, he said, Andrea, you can be the new arrival. That way you can get a better understanding of the situation in the village, and I'll be the decent man trying to preserve the old ways. The group will be made up of couples who go to church and get together on Saturdays to do work in the community and generally help one another out. We lay down on the floor, did some relaxation, and then began the exercise proper, which was really simple. The main character, in this case, me, created various situations and the others reacted to them. When the relaxation was over, I transformed myself into Athena. In my fantasy, she roamed the world like Satan in search of subjects for her realm, but she disguised herself as Gaia, the goddess who knows everything and created everything. For 15 minutes, the other actors paired up into couples, got to know each other, and invented a common history involving children, farms, and understanding and friendship. And when I felt this little universe was ready, I sat on one corner of the stage and began to speak about love. Here we are in this little village, and you think I'm a stranger, which is why you're interested in what I have to tell you. You've never traveled, and you don't know what's going on or what goes on beyond the mountains, but I can tell you. There's no need to praise the earth. The earth will always be generous in this community. The important thing is to praise human beings. You say you'd love to travel, but you misuse the word love. Love is a relationship between people. Your one desire is for the harvest to be a good one, and that's why you've decided to love the earth. No more nonsense. Love isn't desire or knowledge or admiration. It's a challenge. It's an invisible fire. And that's why if you think I'm a stranger on this earth, you're wrong. Everything is familiar to me because I come in strength and in fire. And when I leave, no one will be the same. I bring true love, not the love they write about in books or fairy tales. The husband of one of the couples began looking at me. His wife became distraught. During the rest of the exercise, the director, or rather, the decent man, did all he could to explain the importance of maintaining traditions and praising the earth and asking the earth to be as generous this year as it had been last year. I spoke only of love. He says the earth needs rituals. Well, I can guarantee that if there's love enough among you, you'll have an abundant harvest, because love is a feeling that transforms everything. But what do I see? Friendship, passion died out a long time ago, because you all got used to one another. And that's why the earth gives only what it gave last year, neither more nor less. And that's why in the darkness of your souls you silently complain that nothing in your life changes. Why? Because you've always tried to control the force that transforms everything, so that your lives can carry on without being faced by any major challenge. The decent man explained, our community has survived because we've always respected the laws by which even love itself is guided. Anyone who falls in love without taking into account the common good will be condemned to live in constant fear of hurting his partner, of irritating his new love, of losing everything he built. A stranger with no ties and no history can say what she likes, but she doesn't know how hard it was to get where we are now. She doesn't know the sacrifices we made for our children. She doesn't know that we work tirelessly so that the earth will be generous to us, so that we will be at peace, and so that we can store away provisions for the future. For an hour I defended the passion that devours everything, while the decent man spoke of the feeling that brings peace and tranquility, and in the end I was left talking to myself, while the whole community gathered around him. I played my role with great gusto and with conviction I didn't even know I felt. And despite everything, though, the stranger left the village without having convinced anyone, and that made me very, very happy. Heron Ryan, journalist. An old friend of mine says, people learn 25% from their teacher, 25% from listening to themselves, 25% from their friends, and 25% from time. At that first meeting at Athena's apartment, where she was trying to conclude a class that she had started at the theater, we all learned from, I'm not quite sure from what. She was waiting for us with her son in her small living room. I noticed that the room was entirely painted in white and was completely empty apart from one item of furniture with a sound system on it and a pile of CDs. I thought it odd that her son should be there because he was sure to be bored by the class. I was assuming she would simply pick up from where we had stopped, giving us commands through single words, but she had other plans. She explained that she was going to play some music from Siberia and that we should all just listen. Nothing more. I don't get anywhere meditating, she said. I see people sitting there with their eyes closed, a smile on their lips, or else grave-faced and arrogant, concentrating on absolutely nothing, convinced that they're in touch with God or the goddess. So instead, let's listen to some music together. Again, that feeling of unease, as if Athena didn't know exactly what she was doing, but nearly all the actors from the theater were there, including the director who, according to Andrea, had come to spy on the enemy camp. Blah 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 blah. The music stopped. This time I want you to dance to a rhythm that has nothing whatever to do with the melody. Athena put the music on again, with the volume right up, and started to dance, making no attempt to move gracefully. Only an older man who took the role of the drunken king in our latest play did as he was told. No one else moved. They all seemed slightly constrained. One woman looked at her watch. Only 10 minutes had passed. Athena stopped and looked around. Why are you just standing there? Well, said one of the actresses timidly, it seems a bit ridiculous to be doing that. We've been trained in harmony, not its opposite. Just do as I say. Do you need an explanation? Right, I'll give you one. Changes only happen when we go totally against everything we're used to doing. Turning to the drunken king, she said, why do you agree to dance against the rhythm of the music? Oh, I've never had any sense of rhythm anyway. Everyone laughed, and the dark cloud hanging over us seemed to disperse. Right, I'm going to start again, and you can either follow me or leave. This time, I'm the one who decides when the class ends. One of the most aggressive things as a human being can do is to go against what he or she believes is nice or pretty, and that's what we're going to do today. And we're all going to belly dance badly, or we're all going to dance badly. Got that a little, yeah. It was just another experiment. In order to not embarrass our hostess, everyone obediently danced badly. I struggled with myself because one's natural tendency was to follow the rhythms of that marvelous, mysterious percussion. I felt as if I were insulting the musicians who were playing and the composer who created it. Every so often, my body tried to fight against that lack of harmony, and I was forced to make myself behave as I'd been told to. The boy was dancing as well, laughing all the time. Then at a certain point, he stopped and sat down on the sofa as if exhausted by his efforts. The CD was switched off in midstream. Wait. We all waited. I'm going to do something I've never done before. She closed her eyes and held her head between her hands. I've never danced unrhythmically before. So the experiment had been worse for her than for any of us. I don't feel well. Both the director and I got to our feet. Andrea shot me a furious glance, but I still went over to Athena. Before I could reach her, however, she asked us to return to our places. Does anyone want to say anything? Her voice sounded fragile, tremulous, and she still had not uncovered her face. I do. It was Andrea. First, pick up my son, tell him that his mother's fine, but I need to stay like this for as long as necessary. Vioral looked frightened. Andrea sat him on her lap and stroked him. What do you want to say? Nothing. I've changed my mind. The boy made you change your mind, but carry on anyway. Slowly, Athena removed her hands and looked up. Her face was that of a stranger. No, I won't speak. All right, you, Athena said, pointing to the older actor. Go to the doctor tomorrow. The fact that you can't sleep and have to keep getting up in the night to go to the toilet is serious. It's cancer of the prostate. The man turned pale. And you, she pointed at the director. Accept your sexual identity. Don't be afraid. Accept that you hate women and love men. Are you saying, don't interrupt me? I'm not saying this because of Athena. I'm merely referring to your sexuality. You love men, and there is, I believe, nothing wrong with that. She wasn't saying that because of Athena, but she was Athena. And you, she pointed to me, come over here. Kneel down before me. Afraid of what Andrea might do, and embarrassed to have everyone's eyes on me, I nevertheless did as she asked. Bow your head and let me touch the nape of your neck. I felt the pressure of her fingers, but nothing else. We remained like that for nearly a minute, and then she told me to get up and go back to my seat. You won't need to take sleeping pills anymore. From now on, sleep will return. I glanced at Andrea. I thought she might say something, but she looked as amazed as I did. One of the actresses, possibly the youngest, raised her hand. I'd like to say something, but I need to know who I'm speaking to. Hagia Sophia. I'd like to know if... She glanced around, ashamed, but the director nodded, asking her to continue. If my mother's all right. She's by your side. Yesterday when you left the house, she made you forget your handbag, and you went back to find it, discovered that you locked yourself out and couldn't get in. You wasted a whole hour looking for a locksmith, and when you could have kept the appointment you made, met the man who was waiting for you, and got the job you wanted. But if everything had happened as you planned that morning, in 6 months' time, you would have died in a car accident. Forgetting your handbag yesterday changed your life. The girl began to weep. Does anyone else have anything or want to ask anything? Another hand went up. It was the director. Does he love me? So it's true. The story about the girl's mother had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions in the room. You're asking the wrong question. What you need to know is, are you in a position to give him the love that he needs? And whatever happens or doesn't happen will be equally gratifying. Knowing that you are capable of love is enough. If it isn't him, it will be somebody else. You've discovered a wellspring. Simply allow it to flow and it will fill your world. And don't try to keep a safe distance so as to see what happens. Don't wait to be certain before you take a step. What you give, you will receive. Although it might sometimes come from the place you least expect. Those words applied to me too. Then Athena, or whoever she was, turned to Andrea. You, my blood froze. You must be prepared to lose the universe you created. What do you mean by universe? What do you think you already have? Or what you think you already have? You've imprisoned your world, but you know that you must liberate it. Do you know? I know you understand what I mean. Even though you don't want to hear it. I understand. I was sure they were talking about me. Was this all a setup by Athena? It's finished. She said, bring the child to me. Bjorl didn't want to go. He was frightened by his mother's transformation, but Andrea took him gently by the hand and led him to her. Athena, or Hagia Sophia, or Shireen, or whoever she was, did just as she had done with me, and pressed the back of the boy's neck with her fingers. Don't be frightened. Don't be frightened by the things that you see, my child. Don't try to push them away, because they'll go away anyway. Enjoy the company of the angels while you can. You're frightened now, but you're not as frightened as you might be, because you know there are lots of people in the room. You stopped laughing and dancing when you saw me embracing your mother and asking to speak through her mouth. But you know, I wouldn't be doing this if she hadn't given me her permission. And I've always appeared before in the form of light, and I still am that light. But today I decided to speak. The little boy put his arms around her. You can go now. Leave me alone with him. One by one, we left the apartment, leaving the mother with her child. In the taxi home, I tried to talk to Andrea, but she said that we could talk about anything but what had just happened. I said nothing, my soul filled with sadness. Losing Andrea was very hard. On the other hand, I felt an immense peace. The evening's events had wrought changes in us all, and that meant I wouldn't need to go through the pain of sitting down with a woman I loved very much and telling her that I was in love with someone else. In this case, I chose silence. I got home, turned on the TV, and Andrea went to have a bath. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, the room was full of light. It was morning, and I'd slept for 10 hours. Beside me was a note in which Andrea said that she hadn't wanted to wake me, that she'd gone straight to the theater, but had left me some coffee. The note was a romantic one, decorated in lipstick, and a small cut-out heart. She had no intention of letting go of her universe. She was going to fight, and my life would become a nightmare. That evening she phoned, and her voice betrayed no particular emotion. She told me that the elderly actor had gone to see his doctor, who had examined him and found that he had an enlarged prostate. The next step was a blood test, where they had detected a significantly raised level of a type of protein called PSA. They took a sample for biopsy, but the clinical picture indicated that there was a high chance that he had a malignant tumor. The doctor said that he was lucky because even if their worst fears were proved right, they could still operate, and there's a 99% chance of a cure. Very nice. Alright, I'm going to take a break, and I will return.